Welcome back. This is Chicken Philosophy, Nag Hammadi, Part 2. I'm your host, Gwydion, and today I'll be picking up right where Frater BT left off last time. Hey, Pymander, can you not do that when I'm in the middle of a recital?
Actually, I was trying to get your attention.
All right, you've got my attention. What's up?
I've always had an interest in Gnosticism. I think that there might be a little bit of Buddhist influence on some of those scriptures.
Oh, interesting.
It's been a while since I've been on Chicken Philosophy, so
Yeah, sure.
thank you very much. All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Pymander the Aquarian. Normally, you find me over on Buddhist Books Podcast. That's we read the Tipitaka, the Three Baskets of Pre-Sectarian Early Buddhism. Sometimes we read Shingon or the Life and Liberation of Padmasambhava, or the Zen teachings of Dogen, or a little bit of Mahayana here and there. We do some movie reactions to things like Kundun and all that. So yeah, you can find me over there. All the stuff we don't do on Chicken Philosophy. In fact, Chicken Philosophy was inspired by Buddhist Books Podcast, because for 2 years I was reading nothing but Buddhist scripture, and then eventually those black books were just sitting there, and one day I thought I should start another channel so that I can read those black books like I've been reading these Buddhist scriptures, and that's how Chicken Philosophy came to be. Now you know. All right, so picking up right where BT left off in part 1 of Nag Hammadi, I will, here we go. This is where he left off. James M. Robinson has offered another version of the story of the discovery. For a number of years, Robinson conducted interviews with people from the towns and villages in the Nag Hammadi area. In particular, Muhammad Ali of the Al-Saman clan. Probably not the same, I'm assuming, not the same Muhammad Ali as the famous one. Anyway, a resident of Al-Qasr, and from the interviews he pieced together a fascinating account of how the Nag Hammadi codices were uncovered. Where possible, Robinson attempted to confirm dates and events from official records. As Robinson has reconstructed the story, the discovery of the Nag Hammadi library took place in about December of 1945. Again, December 4th, 1945 was my mom's birthday. Trippy. When several Egyptian Falahin, including Muhammad Ali, his brothers Khalifa Ali and Abu al-Magd and others, Magd, M-A-G-D, were riding their camels to the Jabal al-Tarif in order to gather sabak, a natural fertilizer that typically accumulates around there. They hobbled their camels at the foot of the Jabal. The account continues, and began to dig around a large boulder on the talus, or slope of debris, that had formed against the cliff face. As they were digging, they unexpectedly came upon a large storage jar buried by the boulder, with a bowl sealed on the mouth of the jar as a lid. Apparently, the youngest of the brothers, Abu al-Magd, initially uncovered the jar, but Muhammad Ali, as the oldest, took control of the operation. In his account of what transpired, Muhammad Ali has suggested to Robinson that he paused before removing the lid or breaking open the jar, out of fear that the jar might contain a genie, or spirit, that could cause trouble if released from the jar. It seems that Muhammad Ali also recalled stories of hidden treasures buried in Egypt, and his love of gold overcame his fear of jinn. Oh, okay. I mean, I'm assuming based on context that jinn is plural and genie is singular. Okay. He smashed the jar with his mattock, and indeed something golden in color and glistening in the sunlight, fragments of papyrus, we might conclude, flew out of the jar and disappeared into the air. And when he looked into the broken jar to see what remained, he found only a collection of old books, the codices of the Nag Hammadi library. Robinson's version of the story is carefully documented, and it includes colorful anecdotes and detailed accounts of events. For instance, Robinson reminisces about how he persuaded Muhammad Ali to return to the site of the discovery, so close to Damra Doom, where a family caught up in acts of vengeance with the family of Muhammad Ali lived. Robinson recalls, "I had to go to Hamra Doom myself, find the son of Ahmad Ismail, the man Muhammad Ali had butchered, and get his assurance that since he had, they're just going to gloss over that, what, Muhammad Ali butchered somebody? What's going on? Right. Long since shot up a funeral cortege of Muhammad Ali's family. Oh, okay. Wounding Muhammad Ali and killing a number of his clan. He considered the score settled. Whew. All right. Rough stuff. Hence, he would not feel honor-bound to attack Muhammad Ali if he returned to the foot of the cliff. I took this good news back to Muhammad Ali, who opened his shirt, showed me the scar on his chest, bragged that he had been shot but not killed, yet emphasized that if he ever laid eyes on the son of Ahmad Ismail again, he would kill him on the spot. As a result of this display of braggadocio's fearlessness, he could be persuaded to go to the cliff, camouflaged in my clothes, in a government jeep, with me sitting on the bullets side facing the village and him on the safer cliff side at dusk in Ramadan, when all Muslims are at home eating their fill after fasting through the daylight hours. Okay, so that's the end of the anecdote. That was very colorful indeed. More recently, in the 1970s, perhaps 1978, I was born in 1978. Weird how these dates happen to correspond very directly to these things that are very personal to me and my family. Yet another collection of manuscripts was unearthed in Egypt. Seems like every time someone in my family is born, they unearth another. I know it's just correlation does not mean causation. Right. Anyway, the details of the story of this discovery remain shrouded in uncertainty, and the names of the Falahin have not been disclosed. According to what the researcher and writer Herbert Crosney has been able to reconstruct of the discovery, the manuscripts were found in Middle Egypt near Al-Minya in a cave used for burial at the Jabal Karara. The cave contained, among other things, Roman glassware in baskets or papyrus or straw wrappings. Crosney writes, "The burial cave was located across the river from Magaga, not far from the village of Karara, in what is known as Middle Egypt. The Falahin stumbled upon the cave hidden down in the rocks. Climbing down to it, they found the skeleton of a wealthy man in a shroud. Other human remains, probably members of the dead man's family, were with him in the cave. His precious books were beside him, encased in a white limestone box." Okay, so that's the end of that clip. Back to the main text. The ancient books contained in this collection of codices are reported to have included 1. A Greek mathematical text, 2. A Greek edition of the Book of Exodus from the Jewish Scriptures, 3. We know the Book of Exodus, you don't have to clarify. 3. A Coptic set of New Testament letters of Paul, and 4. A book now referred to as Codex Techakos, with Coptic versions of the letter of Peter to Philip, James, also called First Revelation of James, the Gospel of Judas, and a text entitled tentatively the Book of Allogenes. For our purposes, Codex Techakos is of particular interest since it is a Nag Hammadi type of codex with two texts known from the Nag Hammadi library, the letter of Peter to Philip and James, and two texts that were previously unknown or unavailable, the Gospel of Judas and the Book of Allogenes, or Allogenes, or something. Allogenes, maybe. Unfortunately, Codex Techakos later was moved from place to place and passed from hand to hand, and the papyrus book suffered extensive damage due to the greed and ineptitude of people. It was stored away in a safe deposit box in humid Hicksville, New York for 6 years. The aptly named, that's not nice. For 6 years, and was placed in a freezer in the Midwest in a misguided effort to separate papyrus pages. At last, the codex was acquired by Freda Techakos Nussberger and the Maecenas Foundation. It was given the necessary support for its publication by the National Geographic Society, and it was restored and conserved by Rodolphe Kasser, Florence Darbre, and Gregor Wurst. What was a box of hundreds and hundreds of papyrus fragments has become a legible codex once again. In the spring of 2006, the Gospel of Judas was released to the world, and it has generated international enthusiasm and excitement. I remember my Hebrew teacher, Gila, was very excited about that. I think I watched something, but she told me a lot about it, and I think I watched a YouTube video about it, but I guess it's in here, so we'll get to read it at some point in this series. All right, the circumstances of the discovery of the Nag Hammadi library and the other Coptic texts are debated among scholars, and the debate is likely to continue into the future. However, these various codices may have been uncovered, and whatever may be the implications of the discoveries, the discoverers could not have imagined the impact these texts would have on our understanding of early Christianity and the world of antiquity and late antiquity. All right, that's the end of that section. So this is the beginning of the next section. The section is called, What are the Nag Hammadi Scriptures? Okay, here we go. Currently, in discussions among scholars throughout the world, the discovery of the Nag Hammadi library is transforming what we know about Christianity and its mysterious founder. For more than 1,500 years, most Christians had assumed that the only sources of tradition about Jesus and his disciples are those contained in the New Testament, especially in the familiar Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Suddenly, however, the unexpected discovery of over 50 ancient texts, most of them Christian, has demonstrated what the Church Fathers, among many more what the Church Fathers long had indicated, that these familiar Gospels are only a small selection from among many more traditions and Gospels that, from the early generations of the Christian movement, circulated among groups throughout the known world. Now, for the first time in more than 1,500 years, scholars could open and read other Gospels: the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Truth, the Gospel of Philip, and the Gospel of Mary. Parentheses, Mary had been discovered in 1896. And parentheses, I assume they mean the Gospel of Mary had been discovered around 1896. Sources that enormously widen our understanding of the scope of the early Christian movement. Those who first investigated these writings quickly recognized that some of them at least date back to the earliest centuries of the Christian movement, but they assumed that these must be false gospels. Certain, quote, fathers of the church, end quote, had mentioned by name such writings as the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Truth, but apart from the names, such writings had remained virtually unknown, since some of the same church leaders had attacked them as, quote, heresy, end quote. Irenaeus of... Now be honest, that's what makes some of you interested in it in the first place. What are these heretical gospels? Anyway, of Lyon, for example, who wrote around 160 Common Era, had discussed and denounced passages from the secret book of John, discovered complete at Nag Hammadi. And his famous contemporary Hippolytus, a Christian writer in Rome, quoted some of the opening lines from perhaps the most famous book of the discovery, the Gospel of Thomas. This shows that both of these texts, and no doubt many others, had been written and widely circulated among Christian groups by the middle of the 2nd century. Irenaeus also mentioned a Gospel of Truth, which he said was written, quote, recently, end quote, perhaps around 130 to 160 Common Era, by the Egyptian Christian poet Valentinus, or one of his followers, perhaps the same Gospel of Truth now discovered at Nag Hammadi. Irenaeus specifically mentioned the Gospel of Judas, which he said teaches that Judas alone, quote, knew the truth as no one else did, end quote, and enacted the, quote, mystery of the betrayal, end quote, obeying a command from Jesus to initiate his sacrifice. So if the Gospel of Judas was discovered in 2006, where did the author of The Last Temptation of Christ get the idea to do that very thing? Comment below. All right. Where were we? The Gospel of Judas actually discovered only in the 1970s. Oh, what was the thing about the Gospel of Judas? Oh, yeah, there was something about when it was, maybe when it was released publicly or published in 2006. I remember it being in headlines in 2006. In the spring of 2006, the Gospel of Judas was released to the world. Oh, right. Okay, so it was discovered in the 1970s. So the author, I assume the author of Last Temptation of Christ, had some privileged esoteric knowledge of it that inspired. I mean, I'm assuming the book was like the movie. If you haven't seen the movie or read the book, then perhaps you have no idea what I'm talking about. But that was basically I'm now it's getting into spoiler territory. Go watch Last Temptation of Christ. Willem Dafoe, Green Goblin. You know Willem Dafoe, right? He plays Lord Yeshua, or Jesus, as he's known in English. Anyway, yes, okay. It has now been translated from Coptic and published for the first time in nearly 2,000 years. Yet, since scholars who relied upon Irenaeus' account also noticed that the bishop had classified all such gospels, and many other writings he dismissed along with them, as both, quote, illegitimate, end quote, and, quote, apocryphal, end quote, they assumed that the recently discovered texts they were reading must be what Irenaeus called them, quote, heresy, end quote. Irenaeus had insisted that such writings were, quote, wholly unlike what has been handed down to us from the apostles, end quote. And he called those who revered such writings, quote, heretics, end quote. He concluded indeed that, quote, the heretics say they have more gospels than there really are. But really, they really have no gospel which is not full of blasphemy, end quote. Thus, those who first read and published these texts assumed that the Christian texts among them were not really Christian, but, quote, heretical, end quote, the works of heretics, who accepted what Irenaeus called, quote, falsely so-called gnosis, end quote. What apparently had happened to these texts only confirmed that impression. Although they were originally written in Greek, like the New Testament Gospels, these texts discovered in Egypt had been translated into Coptic, perhaps by Christian monks who treasured them as holy books, in the library of one of the oldest monasteries in Egypt. But the monks' reverence for such writings apparently upset Athanasius, the Archbishop of Alexandria, who sent out an Easter letter all over Egypt in the spring of 367, ordering believers to reject what he called, quote, illegitimate and secret books, end quote. Athanasius, who admired his predecessor Irenaeus for his strong stand against, quote, heretics, end quote, also included a list of 27 books of which he approved, calling them the, quote, springs of salvation, end quote. Strikingly, the 27 books he names in this letter are precisely those that came to constitute the collection we now call the New Testament, for which his letter provides our earliest known list. But apparently some monks defied the archbishop's order to reject all the rest. Instead, they saved and protected over 50 texts from the library by sealing them in a heavy jar and burying them away from the monastery walls under the cliff where they were found 1,600 years later. All right, I had this idea that we were going to maybe finish the introduction today, but I think that's a good place to close for today. Is this a short episode? Let me read a little more. It just seemed like a good, poignant place to end, but I'll read a little more. Okay. Yet, as we have seen, many of these writings already had been circulating widely throughout the ancient world before the archbishop took action. 200 years earlier, as we noted, the Bishop Irenaeus, after charging that the many Christians among his congregations in rural Gaul, present-day France, who treasured such writings were actually, quote, heretics, end quote, went on to insist that of the dozens of Gospels revered by various Christians, only 4 are genuine. And these 4, Irenaeus declares, are the Gospels now included in the New Testament, called by the names of Jesus' followers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. All the rest are illegitimate, because he says, quote, there cannot be more than 4 Gospels, nor fewer, end quote. Why not? Good question. Irenaeus explains that just as there are 4 corners of the universe and 4 principal winds, so there can only be 4 Gospels. Oh, well, that's just pure reason, isn't it? Which he seems to take as a kind of scientific explanation. To those who would ask, quote, why these 4? End quote, Irenaeus declares that only these are written by eyewitnesses of the events they describe. Jesus' disciples, Matthew and John, or disciples of these disciples like Luke and Mark. Few scholars today would agree with Irenaeus. In the first place, we cannot verify who actually wrote any of these accounts, and many scholars agree that although certain traditions were associated with certain disciples, the disciples themselves may not be their authors. Second, nearly all the other, quote, Gospels, end quote, that Irenaeus detests are also attributed to disciples, often disciples from the same group as these. All right, that's where we're going to close today. Thank you again, Gwydion, for allowing me to guest host for this episode.
Anytime, Pymander.
All right, and I think it's safe for me to speak for Editor Edward and say that if you wait until after the chicken cluck you'll find a link there in the middle of the screen to a video called Introduction to Buddhist Books Podcast. Mostly because there was like 450 so far people came to watch the Nag Hammadi part 1. So I just wanted to let you know about another channel that is a sister channel of Chicken Philosophy where we read Buddhist scriptures as well. If you're interested in that, then yeah, you can click that link, watch the introduction, be sure to click subscribe while you're there. And if you haven't already, do please feel free to click like and subscribe on this video. And then we can see you next time. Next time it'll be Edward, if I'm not mistaken, reciting in Nag Hammadi Part 3. So there's 3 of us. You might notice we're all the same person. Gwydion has a hat and an attitude. Edward is a normal person. You gotta have one of those if you want to get by in the world. And then BT is a relic of our former life when we were a Golden Dawn adept back in the old country, the United States. Now we're in what for us is the new country, i.e. India. All right. Anyway, now that that's as clear as mud, I will go ahead and do my usual closing that I do on Buddhist Books Podcast. Might be a little unusual here on Chicken Philosophy, but it's what I do. To the north and to the south, to the east and to the west, to the spirits of light among us and to the spirits below, we send out our reverent love and compassion. May all beings be happy. May all beings be serene. May all beings be in peace. Oh.